I don't even know if you can like make a distinction between Ethan and Destiny's community at this point. They're just in lockstep. They're in total lockstep in terms of who they're targeting, what their talking points are, and the clips that they use and what they decide to cover. The Israeli left or liberal Zionists like Ethan, they're not like fundamentally opposed to what the settlers are doing or what Netanyahu's doing. They just don't like that it makes Israel look bad. That's the issue. And so they're not able to principally take a stand and like advocate against the that's happening, because advocating against it would mean the dismantling of the Israeli ethno-state. And Ethan Klein doesn't believe it's an ethno-state. He doesn't believe it's apartheid, and he likes it. And so he's not willing to take a stand and actually go against the fundamental basis of what Israel was built off of, because he likes the fundamental basis of having like a Jewish state and having a Jewish ethno-state.
A personal favorite of mine was an article from the New York Times called "It Can Be Lonely to Have Middle-of-the-Road Opinions on the Middle East," which focused on college students that were seeking space for nuanced perspectives on the Israel-Hamas war. The perspective presented in this article is one-sided. They talk about extremism in student movements, but the only example they give for this point is that of the extremist Palestinian activists. The New York Times calls it a war with no reference to the numerous credible allegations of. It's harder to justify having a conversation about nuanced opinions of, so they just call it a war. There's no nuance in, there's nothing progressive about. This tendency to falsely frame it with neutrality will often slip into outright endorsement. Recall Israel's pager attack in Lebanon when they detonated over 1,000 pagers rigged with explosive. This was a widespread mass attack that indiscriminately targeted civilians and left hundreds dead and permanently injured and disfigured, including a number of children.
أول شيء أنا كنت إنه قاعد عم بلعب على التليفون وهي إنه فجرت الساعة 3 إنه قبل ما أنا أحملها عم بلعب على التليفون هيك صارت ترن غريبة أنا إنه قمت حملتها حطيت لي ايرور وسهم إنه عشان أكبس أوكي والضوء صار يغبش على الآخر يعني عشان نقربها على عيوننا أنا قربت عشان نشوف شو فيه بس فقعت ما عرفت شي.
Among those murdered was Fatima Abdullah, a 9-year-old girl. At her funeral, as well as other funerals with large crowds of people, Israel detonated more of these explosives. Despite this being a child-killing and maiming indiscriminate attack in violation of international law, in Western liberal media it was presented as a cool James Bond-style operation. It was described using words like...
honestly, like, this pager attack was insane, dude. And then what was that guy that talked to Mehdi Hassan? He's like, I hope your pager doesn't blow up. Basically threatening him with an attack. Oh, man. Just complete dehumanization of anyone that dares to stand up against this.
Ambitious, sophisticated, and daring.
The Israeli spy agency Mossad launched one of the most daring and sophisticated deceptions in the history of counterintelligence.
An extraordinary act of espionage, an example of Israel's technological prowess. According to the New York Times, the attack restored the aura of Israel's intelligence agencies. Before covering the attack, these outlets always, of course, make sure to mention Hezbollah's U.S. designation as a terrorist organization. Don't worry, guys, they were just nothing to see here. We got the bad guys. They were bad. We are good. Mission accomplished. And of course, as we've touched on a couple times, lying by omission. That's another thing. With every previous example, you see it. The Israeli hostages receive wall-to-wall coverage with no mention of the fact that the majority of the deaths of these hostages were a product of the Israeli military through airstrikes or firing on hostages while they were waving white flags, or that on October 7th, Israel issued the Hannibal Directive, likely many hundreds of its own civilians as a matter of official policy. One of the really effective propaganda strategies that results from these lies by omissions comes in the case of allegations. Western outlets rarely, if ever, actually mention the numerous allegations of genocide levied against Israel. The few times that they do, they're often brief, unspecific, and accompanied with equivocation or lengthy citations of Israel's defense against the allegations. When the New York Times covered the Amnesty International report. The subheading immediately backtracks into running cover for Israel. Israel rejected the charge, the first of its kind by a major human rights organization, saying it was based on lies. The Times went on to spend more of the article sharing the IDF's defense against the allegations than any of the findings from the actual report. Amnesty International gave us 300 pages of facts about Israel says that they're just lies. I guess we'll never know what happened here. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. When Human Rights Watch released their report accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity and through its deliberate deprivation of access to clean drinking water, readers of the New York Times wouldn't have heard about that because the New York Times just didn't report it. That's one of the top human rights organizations in the world, accusing the #1 ally of the most powerful country in the world of the crime of all crimes. And they just forgot? No, they didn't forget. The editorial staff at the New York Times knows that they've helped this. They know that they are complicit in this. So any chance they get to just sort of forget to mention something as consequential as a allegation from the leading human rights group in the world, they'll do it. Of course they will. This tracks with the BBC's repeated denial, evident in repeated instances of reporters condemning or correcting guests for using the word genocide to describe Israel's actions in Gaza.
Israel would deny that a genocide is taking place, saying that it is defending its right to exist. Its very existence, indeed, they would say, is under threat. So there are obviously two sides to this.
This whole issue of right of self-defense has allowed Israel to inflict the mass murder and mass destruction, what the ICJ now describe as plausible. This
Can I
is
just
not,
say,
this is not an act of
you know what I'm going to have to say. I'm going to say Israel denies that. They say that they were in pursuit of Hamas terrorists who hid behind their own people.
This is a happening in front of our eyes.
We have, that word, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
So afraid to say the word, man. Oh, the word genocide is emotive. Oh, well, it's also descriptive of what's happening right now. I'm sorry that it gets your emotions in a bunch. Anyway, I'm pleasantly surprised by this YouTube video so far. Basically 40 minutes in, and Noah's just described what's been happening in Gaza right now. So great job from him.
They don't target
That's
civilians.
not the truth, unfortunately.
Planned, military incursions.
Yes, but it's not the truth.
Yes, civilians are dying.
Civilians are dying, and the way that the bombs are getting dropped, I don't believe are in a targeted way. Nothing from what I'm hearing on the ground suggests that the bombs have been dropped in a targeted way. Our social media manager, all 5 houses around him got blown up. They estimate 100 people were killed in them. Yesterday, his house was the last one remaining in the neighborhood. They leveled an entire neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
And I do need to make that qualification, of course, that that it is always denied by the Israelis that is taking place. They say,
why? Who cares? Who cares? The only reason she has to make that distinction is because Israel and then the United States would be pissed at CNN. Right? Was this CNN or was this BBC? BBC. Israel would be pissed at the BBC if they didn't push back against this. I mean, they're already pissed enough that they're allowing Palestinians to speak at all. And so, yeah, they'd be really... That's the only reason. I mean, it's only because of her job. What, you need, every time you speak about Israel, you need to repeat the Israeli State Department talking point?
these are strategic planned strikes in Gaza and that they are targeting the militant group Hamas.
But I'm here to let the world know that that's not the case.
Kareem, you've been able to have your say. This is what the Israelis will always say in response to that.
This effort to whitewash and run cover for the has been intentional, of course, and we have the proof. It's been confirmed with direct evidence and testimony, with internal newsroom memos from not only the BBC, but the New York Times as well. And the last thing to talk about is just atrocity propaganda. One of the primary justifications for the genocide in Gaza is that members of Hamas are not just militants, but that they are monsters, pure evil motivated by nothing more than the sadistic hatred of Jews. This narrative has been fueled by stories of horrors that supposedly took place on October 7th. Hamas burned babies in ovens.
They burnt babies alive.
They put children and burned them to death.
They cut the breasts off of women.
400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off as terrorists played with their bloody breasts like a football.
They cut off the breasts of women and throw them around.
They beheaded 40 babies.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
They behead children.
They cut the fetus out of the womb of a pregnant woman. They committed a campaign of systematized mass.
There is no justification for collective
What happened on October 7th was mass, systematic, planned, and genital mutilation of women.
All of these claims are false, complete fabrications, full stop. No credible evidence has been provided for any of them. Many were shown to be deliberately fabricated, and despite this, they were spread far and wide and ultimately used as rhetorical justification to continue the onslaught in Gaza. The first major place this narrative broke was Screams Without Words, a front-page New York Times story in late December of 2023. This story came as Israel's actions in Gaza were starting to receive widespread condemnation from the international community. The story was thoroughly debunked. The person who wrote it discredited as being a Zionist with no history of reporting and self-admitting that the New York Times pushed for this story to come to the public despite the lack of credible evidence. The New York Times podcast, The Daily, shelved the episode due to a lack of credible evidence, but the New York Times never retracted the story, which is because they had no real pressure to do so. The false narrative had already prevailed, and that narrative was consistent with the status quo of the American empire, for whom they are running cover. In July of last year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated some of these lies in front of Congress. He received a standing ovation. 3 weeks later, the White House approved a $20 billion military aid package to Israel. They explicitly cited Netanyahu's visit as one of their motivations for doing so. Atrocity propaganda has consequences. So with that context out of the way about the Gaza and its support from the West and within Israel, the broader media system that allowed it to happen, let's now return to Ethan's video. In the content nuke, you can find just about every type of what we just looked at in terms of manufacturing consent. Ethan spreads atrocity propaganda. He shares the Hamas mass hoax, the same hoax that was used by the Western media, the US government, and the Israeli government to justify
he said it was a hoax. He said that the mass that there's not really any evidence of, and Israel won't let independent investigators come in and investigate, and actually they completely ruined any evidence that would have supported that by like moving all of the bodies and then ruining their autopsies. Noah said that the mass was a hoax. He's actually a Hamas agent. Noah Samson is Hamas.
It's the same sources that these parties cite when they go on stage to legitimize more military killing machinery shipments to Israel.
And October 7, last year, Hamas committed horrific acts of violence. Cheryl, I thank you for all your work to bring to light the horrors of this issue and for your film about what happened on October 7.
In his video, Ethan spreads overt misinformation, just straight up lies about Hezbollah and Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, in order to delegitimize their struggle against Israel's. He cites baseless claims from Saudi state propaganda outlets to attack the Houthis. He also cites a documentary about Ansar Allah, which he uses as proof of the claim that they brought back slavery, when the documentary wasn't even about the Houthis. It was about the Yemeni government before the Houthi takeover. He spreads long debunked Nakba denialist talking points that have been used for decades to legitimize Israeli colonization of Palestine. Ethan cites sources that contradict his own claims directly, such as the UN report he claims proves the Hamas mass allegation.
There's a UN report that concludes it happened,
which the report itself denies. He spends 20 minutes in the video smearing a 19-year-old survivor of the US-backed Saudi genocide
that was
in Yemen
disgusting.
as a terrorist with zero credible evidence. He makes a number of transparently false anti-Semitism accusations, like his claim that Israel's ban on new account signups from Israel was anti-Semitic.
Around the end of the year, when people started talking about anti-Semitism on Twitch, Dan Saltman discovered the Israel ban when he was sent the code proving the block happened.
In reality, the ban also affected millions of non-Jews living in Israel and Palestinians in Palestine, as shown in the evidence he himself cites. The IP ban went into effect in both. Like all these Western liberal outlets, Ethan just takes the State Department line of thinking when it comes to which his video is ostensibly a crusade against. By his own definition of both the US and Israel are the largest organizations in the world, given their history of killing millions of innocent civilians across the globe. His focus is not on them, though, rather the groups that they consider to be terrorists, aka, the bad guys. He actually uses those exact words. He says they're the bad guys.
They are a designated group by the US, by the EU. These guys are clearly the bad guys.
The entire video is kind of a lie by omission, simply because of everything we just went over. How none of it is a factor, how none of the people viewing the video that are unfamiliar with what's happening would ever come away with his video knowing the full picture, knowing some of the very valid reasons why someone like Hassan might be critical of Israeli atrocity propaganda, or might support groups like the Houthis for their heroic actions in the Red Sea against a genocide regime. The biggest issue, I think, is that Ethan manages to do all of this while still calling himself a stalwart ally to the Palestinians.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
This is what makes liberal Zionism so insidious. He is using humanistic appeals to things like peace and safety, but doing so in a way that distracts from the actual source of the problem. The problem is Zionism and the Israeli state. That is what's causing these problems. And people that might otherwise be able to understand if presented with the facts of the situation are simply led astray by people like Ethan, where a more right-wing Zionist might put off the average liberal with extremist claims and overtly language. A liberal Zionist draws you in with the facade of empathy. He wants to appear empathetic, as if he cares for these people, as if he doesn't ascribe to a ideology. So in order to do that, he has to lie, and roping in otherwise progressive people into a death cult. Aside from this video being a nonsensical title propaganda piece, it's also entirely unoriginal. The video is a culmination of a months-long campaign against Hassan and all these other creators and Twitch, the company, to smear them as and anti-Semites and get people, in trouble. The campaign began as a response to the suspension of the live streamer Asmongold. Asmongold made some comments that explicitly justified Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza.
I'm not going to cry a f***ing river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. They come from an inferior culture. I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't care. I don't support them.
Following his suspension for these comments, a community of large content creators, most notably the live streamer Destiny, along with his fan base, rushed to Asmongold's defense, whitewashing and justifying his comments.
Meanwhile, Asmongold gets a 15-day ban for having a spicy take on the war.
So you have someone like Asmongold, who...
Bro, I don't even know if you can make a distinction between Ethan and Destiny's community at this point. They're just in lockstep. They're in total lockstep in terms of who they're targeting, what their talking points are, and the clips that they use and what they decide to cover. Yeah. I guess at the beginning they're talking about there was maybe a distinction, but not anymore.
Breathes the wrong direction, says the wrong thing, and instantly gets banned.
In this situation, one could, if they were to extend the charitability, could say that Asmongold was probably referring to extremists in the Islamic religion. Extremists in the Islamic religion.
The case of
who gives a dude? Why are people people really defend Asmongold? That's so embarrassing. Honestly, Mudahar. I need to cover him more. He seems like a total piece of shit. He was saying that he's gonna offer to fly Hassan out to Palestine. Dude, oh my god, he's such a loser. But guys, consider signing up for memberships. It helps me out, helps my editors out. Only $1 a month, so it's really not a big deal. Your name can be green, that will be cool. And thanks for watching, everyone.